Good afternoon to you. 406 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Nate Hochman joins us from the American Spectator. We talked to him about NPR's new super crazy CEO. She's wild. We've got some fun details coming up on her. And then Joe Kent, candidate for Congress, will be here at 5 o'clock. We'll talk to him about the latest as Iran attacks Israel, and Israel defends itself. An amazing story. Joe Kent with the information there. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. As we've been covering this afternoon, anti-Israel lunatics have been shutting down traffic all across the country, places like San Francisco, Oakland, Chicago, Philly, Tampa, where they resolved that in 15 minutes, and so many other places. Now we're seeing images of the anti-Israel mob blocking traffic, trying to, for at least for a time, on the Brooklyn Bridge, and NYPD officers going after them very quickly and trying to place people under arrest and rip them off the bridge. Earlier, some of these anti-Israel guys were on the streets of New York, just outside the stock exchange, waving the Hezbollah flag and causing a ruckus. That scene captured by Julio Rosas, the author of Mostly Peaceful, with Julio Rosas Substack, and the author of the book Fiery but Mostly Peaceful. And he joins us on the phone now. Julio, sir, good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us on short notice.
Thanks for having me, Vince.
What are you seeing in New York right now?
So the main anti-Israel march that started at the New York Stock Exchange, they, as you mentioned, about half of them made it on to the Brooklyn Bridge before NYPD was able to stop the other half from getting on. And so I followed the latter half, and we went into the subway, and we're in Brooklyn now. And so this march is currently, right now, as you can kind of hear them in the background, they're back out on the road kind of causing disruptions, and that's a little bit of a problem because there's no NYPD escort for this group because it got split off and went into the subway. I'm not sure where the other half that made it onto the Brooklyn Bridge, I don't know where they're at, or what happened to them.
So obviously marching on the road on the Brooklyn Bridge is going to cause a massive disruption to traffic. What is the goal for these guys in New York? Is it to disrupt traffic? Is it to block traffic? Or are they trying to march around? What are they up to?
So they're just, doing what they normally do. New York has a lot of pro-Palestine, as apparently today pro-Hezbollah people. So they have these marches basically every weekend. The reason why they're having it today and all across the country is because they want to disrupt the economics of tax day, because they make the argument that our taxes are going to Israel, which in turn is funding the genocide, and so that's why they're trying to target the economic wheels of capitalism to try to prevent our tax dollars from going to America.
Yeah, and you've been covering all of this for some time. Have you ever seen it be quite as brazen as it is now? We've got various anti-Israel people all across the country chanting "Death to America," people waving Hezbollah flags. It's out in the open now, Julio.
It's been out in the open for a while. I would say that there's a lot of people now just because it's warmer. I would say this is the first protesters, probably the warmest since October, the very first one, in Times Square. And so right now I'm currently getting shouted out by a protester calling me a fed. I don't know why. And so it's just kind of, this is normal now. This is normal in the United States, but it's also normal in Canada and the UK, where you have anti-American sentiment and anti-Israel sentiment playing out in the streets. You have to walk away right now because you're wrong. And it's just kind of how it goes.
So as you're talking to us right now, there's some guy who's menacing you, who's going after you, calling you a fed?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
You said there's a guy who's accusing you right now of being a fed as we're talking. Is that guy approaching you?
Yeah. But I'm not sure exactly what's going on. The group that I'm marching with right now is kind of aimless because, because the crowd got split in half, so the leaders are in one half and then the rest of the crowd, so they're just kind of meandering around Brooklyn right now.
You used the phrase an NYPD escort before. Was this some sort of like a pre-planned protest that would have police support for it, or what's going on there?
Well, there's usually an escort, and in New York City, there's usually an NYPD escort that monitors any of the crowds to make sure that they're not causing too much of a ruckus.
Yeah.
This one half of the protest that I'm with, because they went onto the subway
Yes.
on short notice, there's no NYPD on hand to keep them off the road or trying to prevent them from doing anything nefarious.
So, Julio, give us a sense of the types of things you've heard from this crowd today. Like I said, we've heard chants of death to America in places like Dearborn and Chicago. Are you seeing that kind of sentiment on the streets of New York today?
Yeah, I did hear a few "Death to America" chants outside the New York Stock Exchange. There's a very pro-Iranian sentiment, given what Iran just did a couple days ago. So, I mean, it's very lively today, and part of that I would just attribute to the warm weather. Because, like I said, this is probably the warmest weather that I've covered in New York City today from the past few months.
Look, who doesn't go out during a warm, nice day and shout "Death to America"? It's totally normal to do that. No, but the point you're making is that it's that all these crazy people, they're coming out because the temperature's better for them to come out.
They're more incentivized to come out, yes, and stay out.
Mm-hmm. All right, so give us a sense of the numbers finally, Julio. What is it? Can you even give us a ballpark of how many people showed up today outside the stock exchange to begin?
Well, I'd say a couple, around 1,000, 1,500. It was a little kind of hard because everyone's kind of bunched up and you can't really see over them. But I'd say about this portion that's currently marching through Brooklyn is about 500, 600.
Okay. All right. Well, that continues. And Julio Rosas, as usual, in the middle of the chaos, documenting it and getting, it sounds like, menaced by some of the people who are there. That's not the first time that's happened either. Julio, thank you very much. And please keep up the good work, sir.
All right. Thank you.
That's Julio Rosas, the author of the book, Fiery but Mostly Peaceful. He's one of just a couple great journalists who have covered so many of the riots and disruptions to society, especially from 2020 onwards. Julio's been doing that for some time, and he's got a Substack, Mostly Peaceful with Julio Rosas. So if you want to support his work, you can do that there. Good guy. And so we see these images of what's happening in New York City on the Brooklyn Bridge, and we see Julio Rosas out there, and we say, we got to get Julio on. Let's have him by. So thank you again to him for doing that. As the chants for death to America have continued all over the place. I just want to remind you what Tom Cotton said on Fox today about all of these people who've been disrupting traffic. He says, it might be time for us to stop waiting for authorities and maybe just have Americans resolve this pretty quickly.
I agree with you that you have to get to these criminals early. If something like this happened in Arkansas on a bridge there, let's just say I think there'd be a lot of very wet criminals that have been tossed overboard, not by law enforcement, but by the people whose road they're blocking. If they glued their hands to a car or the pavement, well, probably pretty painful to have their skin ripped off. But I think that's the way we'd handle it in Arkansas. And I would encourage most people anywhere that get stuck behind criminals like this who are trying to block traffic to take matters in their own hands. There's only usually a few of them, and there's a lot of people being inconvenienced. It's time to put an end to this nonsense.
Yeah, and all these people coming out and doing this stuff in the wake of Iran's attack on Israel, they were, of course, cheering it on, every single one of them, cheering on a missile attack on Israel this weekend. And this is the first time in history Iran has openly attacked Israel in such a way from its own territory and then taking credit for it. Of course, they've been routinely attacking Israel by way of their proxies for a long time. And it consisted of Iran launching more than 300 drones and missiles towards Israel, according to the Israeli military speaking on Sunday. 170 drones, 30 cruise missiles, none of which entered Israeli territory, and at least 110 ballistic missiles, of which a small number reached Israel. And the reason for that is because Israel's Iron Dome was performing really well, stopping this attack, this barrage, shooting down almost everything. They got assists from Western countries as well. You had all sorts of countries helping out, to include the United States, Britain, France, Jordan also helping as well to detect these things and shoot them down. The belief on the left is that this was just all bark, no bite from Iran. At least some corners of the left are saying this today. There's a CNN headline this morning from a woman called Tamara Kiblawi over at CNN, writing on CNN, real headline, Iran's attack seems planned to minimize casualties while maximizing spectacle. Minimize casualties? They fired 300 different projectiles into the air meant to get to the country. And you're saying they were just relying on Israel's Iron Dome being successful? That's the summary here? Oh, they knew the Iron Dome would work, so they knew they wouldn't cause much damage. Come on. That's absurd. It's totally absurd. And also, isn't it kind of emasculating for the Iranian war machine that they couldn't get anything in? They could barely get a missile into Israel. It's pathetic. Why would they plan that out? Hey, guess what? At the end of this, we're going to look like totally incompetent. We have not been able to get a missile in. That's the message that Iran wants to project? Come on. So stupid. So stupid. Speaking of stupid, the White House today, Biden slurring as he announces all of this.
As you know, Iran launched an unprecedented aerial attack against Israel, and we mounted an unprecedented military effort to defend Israel. Together with our partners, we defeated that attack.
Yep, there he is. John Kirby, the one-time admiral, has stepped up to the microphone today to explain things.
Is the administration presenting alternatives to Netanyahu?
This is an Israeli decision to make, whether and how they'll respond.
There's a bunch of reporting that Biden is pressuring Israel not to respond at all.
To what Iran did on Saturday, and we're going to leave it squarely with them.
Their decision to make, but are you making suggestions?
We are not involved in their decision-making process about a potential response.
Oh, stop. You're lying. You're telling them what you want to happen. Stop. What's with all the lies? Why lies all the time? Let's see. Reporter here challenging Kirby about, hey, how come oil production in Iran has skyrocketed if you've been sticking it to Iran?
Iranian oil production is now higher than it was 2 years ago. Is there a reason that you aren't taking more steps against Iranian oil exports, and does it have to do with domestic political pressures around gas prices?
I don't have any, as you know, we don't preview sanctions, and I'm not going to start doing that today, except...
They send 90% to China.
To note what I said in my opening statement, that part of the discussion with the G7 leaders was the possibility of additional sanctions on Iran.
Oh, boy, that sounds exciting. So, you know, and the message that Biden has been sending, we kept getting reports last week, remember? That, oh, get ready, Iran's going to attack Israeli and U.S. forces potentially in the region. We're going to get a big Iranian attack. And then Biden was asked about this. Hey, what's your message to Iran as they contemplate an attack on Israel or Americans?
Mr. President, to Iran in this moment?
Don't.
Are American personnel at risk, Mr. President? Mr. President, are American...
Yeah, don't. It's the same thing he does all the time.
What is your message to Hezbollah and its backer, Iran?
Don't.
And how's that worked? How did that work? Has it stopped Hezbollah?
What's the message to Iran?
Don't.
It was very important to send a very clear message to anyone who might seek to take advantage of the conflict in Gaza to threaten our personnel here or anywhere else in the region. Don't do it.
Don't. That's the whole message. And guess who pays attention to it? Nobody. They don't care what he's saying at all. Peter Doocy asking John Kirby today, has Biden contemplated, changing his response from just the word don't?
Has President Biden considered maybe beefing up the public Iran posture to be more than just one word?
You're referring to don't.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about...
And they did it anyway.
And let's talk about what we did, Peter. Let's talk about don't and did. Let's talk about Saturday night. He made it clear that he didn't want to see escalation in the region.
And was.
Let me finish. He added military resources to the region right after October 7th. And then when we had an inkling that this kind of thing was coming, he added even more military resources to the region.
And did it deter them? Or did they fire hundreds of missiles into Israel?
Destroyers that were capable of shooting down ballistic missiles, a fighter squadron that was able to shoot down drones. And that's what we did. So you can talk about the don't word all you want, but let's talk about what did happen. And what did happen was Iran utterly failed. And if I'm sitting in Tehran right now, I'm betting that President Biden takes it pretty seriously when he says don't escalate. He's going to act to make sure that you can't. And they didn't.
Yeah, that's a stupid answer. Don't didn't work. Don't did not work. It did not stop Iran. They attacked anyway. Oh, we helped them shoot down the missiles. So yeah. Okay. Fair enough, but that's not a response to don't. That's not a policy. It's not deterring them at all. The guy can barely summon a sentence. He's summoning a single contraction. Don't. And it's not working. In fact, a lot of what Biden's doing, it ain't working. Oh, good. In New York, they were lighting an American flag on fire and screaming death to America. So that's a fun escalation. Isn't it crazy what's happening here? Peter Doocy asking John Kirby today, does Biden regret giving the Iranian leaders billions of dollars? And, of course, Kirby plays dumb.
Now that we know that the Iranians do not listen to President Biden's public warnings, is there any regret here about unfreezing billions of dollars for Iranian leaders during the president's administration?
What unfreezing are you talking about?
He unfroze billions of dollars.
For Iranian leaders?
Yeah.
Really? I don't think so.
Okay,
so
you
first of all,
it's for humanitarian purposes, but doesn't that...
But you don't believe me.
Well, doesn't that free up money for them to spend on other stuff?
Yes.
Where do you get the money for an unprecedented number of munitions to fire at Israel?
So first of all, I'm betting if they're sitting in Tehran, they're taking it seriously when President Biden says he's going to defend Israel.
Oh, no, they're
he
not.
Put skin in the game, a whole heck of a lot of it, and knocked almost everything out of the sky. So I'm betting they're taking it pretty seriously. And as for this unfreezing, none of that fund, none of those funds set up in an account, by the way, by the previous administration, goes directly to the supreme leader, the IRGC, can only be used for humanitarian purposes, and we're watching that account very, very closely to make sure that that's what happens.
You know, unlike Coringe, he's smart enough to know better. So Coringe is just a moron. That guy knows better. He knows that by giving Iran billions of dollars, quote, for humanitarian purposes, that's only making their war chest even bigger. And not enforcing these sanctions against Iran's oil exports, allowing China to buy up all this Iranian oil, again, they're funding the war machine. And that's Biden's fault. For real. Coming up, Nate Hochman is here. We'll talk to him about NPR's new CEO. She's Looney Tunes, and it's hilarious. So I can't wait to tell you about that. That's coming up. Well, good afternoon to you. It is 4:36 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Joe Kent joins us, retired Green Beret, a Gold Star husband, candidate for Congress. We'll talk to him about the latest with that war in the Middle East raging. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. NPR has had quite a couple of weeks, haven't they? A whistleblower coming out recently and saying, yeah, they're as crazy as you thought, and they're only getting worse. And in fact, they don't have a single registered Republican even working in their headquarters. It's all Democrats. What was it, number 86-0, I think was the number? 86-0. 86 Democrats, 0 Republicans in Washington, D.C. And now they also have a new CEO, and boy, she is as cringy and left-wing as you could possibly imagine. For more on this, let's bring in Nate Hochman now, a senior advisor to America 2100 and the writer for the American Spectator as well. Nate, good to have you back with us, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me, Vince. Good to be here.
Tell me about Katherine Maher. She's the new CEO at NPR.
She is. Yeah, I think she joined this January, but people are just sort of digging up her totally deranged old tweets now that this recent sort of NPR whistleblower story has broken. But, you know, this woman is in some ways obviously an insane person, but her insanity is also something that is familiar to those of us who pay attention to these. I mean, people going through her tweets are finding her complaining about things like cis white mobility privilege, complaining about racial privilege in the way that white people's hair works, complaining about hysterical white woman voices, you know, justifying the looting and Black Lives Matter riots, all the sort of stuff that we have gotten used to with radical left-wing elites. But it's par for the course at this point.
You know, it's so when people interview for jobs, especially in a political environment like Washington, one of the things you would make sure to have is a public presence that you can defend, right? Because a normal employer is going to look to see, do you have any social media history in public? What does it look like? What do they say? Apparently, NPR saw all of this and thought, that's our girl. Let's hire her as our CEO.
Right. It's not just that it's acceptable. It's that, this specific sort of insanity is often an expectation to land these elite institutional jobs. It's not just the norm or something that could pass. It's a bona fide. It's a burnish. And, obviously Katherine Maher is getting a lot of attention because she recently took over NPR.
Yeah.
But this is pretty normal for folks who run most of our institutions now.
I'm going to quote some of these tweets, and you can find them on Nate Hochman's own X account as well. Here, for instance, is a claim. She said, "I know that hysteric white woman voice. I was taught to do it. I've done it. It's a disturbing recognition. While I don't recall ever using it to deliberately expose another person to immediate physical harm on my own cognizance, it is not impossible. That is whiteness," she said. Here's another one. "And I'm white, so my hair doesn't automatically carry with it the freight of my race, worth, and everyone else's encoded assumptions and biases." Here's another. "Lots of jokes about leaving the U.S., and I get it. But as someone with cis white mobility privilege, I'm thinking I'm staying and investing in ridding ourselves of this specter of tyranny." And perhaps my favorite, I want to quote this one. I love this one. She claimed at one point that she, quote, "had a dream where Kamala and I were on a road trip in an unspecified location, sampling and comparing nuts and baklava from roadside stands. Woke up very hungry." All right, so she dreams. Who dreams about Kamala Harris? She dreams that she travels the country with Kamala Harris consuming nuts. Nate.
Yeah, I had not heard that one. That was the first time I'd heard it, but I am sure there's much more of that. If you actually look through all of her tweets, people have been digging them up for the last few days. It's just absurd. I mean, it's impossible not to laugh at it. The cis white mobility privilege thing, of all of the different privileges to pick from, cisgender, white, etc. Mobility privilege, I would have expected would be sort of much lower on the totem pole, but go figure. I'm not Katherine Maher, but it's ridiculous.
But what she's voicing, as you put just a moment ago, this is what NPR wants. This is exactly who they're looking for. They're looking for somebody who views the world through this sort of demented lens, because that's the kind of judgment that guides their newsroom.
Yeah, not just demented, but visibly and publicly self-loathing. I mean, it's not a particularly original point, but this sort of performative self-hatred by white people is just so viscerally grotesque to me. I mean, these people are driven by a desperate need to constantly prove their loathing for themselves and everyone who looks like them. I don't know of any other, race or demographic that acts like this. And the ridiculous thing is the people they're trying to impress, they're never going to love you, really. I mean, your groveling is just going to embolden them to demand more. Just an ounce of collective self-respect would be great, but you're not going to get it from people like Katherine Maher.
No, not in the slightest. Not in the slightest. So why should taxpayers continue to fund all of this?
Well, they shouldn't. And actually, this is not the first time, obviously, that we've seen this sort of insanity from NPR. I mean, NPR was out there leading the charge, justifying, ignoring the Hunter Biden laptop story. They were out there giving puff piece interviews to the woman who wrote the case for looting in the BLM riots in 2020. So for a long time, it has been abundantly obvious that NPR believes these things and is using your and my taxpayer dollars to broadcast them into homes across the country. But Republicans, have been asleep at the wheel, not just on NPR, but on the billions of dollars, and it is billions, that they're pouring into all of these different institutions that are working to undermine them and ultimately the country.
Yes.
It's not just NPR, like I said, it's also this huge network of NGOs and nonprofits, which are radically left-wing and are on the taxpayer dollar gravy train and have been for some time.
Yeah, why are we giving money to Planned Parenthood? Not only are they aborting children, they're also taking the kids who survive the wound and screwing them up by pumping them full of hormones and convincing them that they're the other gender. And we're funding that. Why are we funding all of this, Nate?
We're not just funding that, we're funding a huge educational bureaucracy and system and a massive conglomerate of huge nonprofits that are advocating for that stuff and justifying it and creating the sort of valence of expertise that justifies insane stuff like pumping kids full of puberty blockers.
Yes.
If you pick almost any radical left institution in the country, at some stage they are getting some kind of taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
None of these institutions are totally private. And Republicans have the power to stop that anytime they want to, at least when they have a congressional majority. And I think it's shameful the GOP hasn't made this a priority.
Also, when it comes to, it totally is, I agree with you. The NPR, the hint, the giveaway is that they lie about their federal funding. Like, as soon as you bring up government funding, they become super duplicitous. They'll say stuff like, oh, government funding doesn't amount to that much for us. Okay, then we can take it away. No, it's essential. We need it. Okay, so you need it, but it's not that big of a component of your funding. And then they will not disclose what is obvious to those of us who can spend 5 seconds researching it. All of the government funding comes by way of their member stations all across the country. And they pretend like they have nothing to do with that. And even though, like, all of this is, almost all of it's government funding. And they lie about it, Nate.
Yeah, it's hilarious. I mean, this is true of a lot of these institutions, which they don't want to let on just how reliant they are on government funding, because most of these institutions couldn't actually make it in a true, quote unquote, free market, because there just isn't enough demand from normal Americans for the products they're peddling.
Yes.
But this is another example of how this huge sort of apparatus of left-wing groups, advocacy groups, media, et cetera, are propped up, and actually their very survival is predicated on a continuation of our tax dollars funding them.
Well,
so
outside
that
of
is the real crime.
Outside of taxpayer-funded NPR, of course, there's a huge range of corporate media outlets that sound an awful lot like NPR in their news coverage. How badly does this mind virus infect many other news organizations?
Oh, it is almost uniform in the way that it affects certainly legacy news outlets. I mean, I'm sure your listeners are familiar with the New York Times and the Washington Post and USA Today and all of these other outlets, which have been explicitly and self-consciously left-wing activists for some time now. They always had a liberal bias, but since 2016, there's been a real pivot in U.S. legacy media towards journalists seeing themselves not as journalists who happen to be liberal, but as liberal activists who happen to be journalists. And it's not just NPR that acts that way.
No, it's everywhere. It really is. Well, Nate Hochman, thank you for documenting it today. You've got, let's see, this NPR CEO. She really is something else, and I'm glad you're on the case. Nate, good to talk to you as always.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
That's Nate Hochman, and you can find him over at the American Spectator. Man, this Katherine Maher. Yeah, there's a picture of her wearing a COVID mask and a Biden for president hat, and now we're giving her money. How great. How great it is. Let's see. Donald Trump has stepped out. President Trump has stepped out of his trial that's expected to last 6 to 8 weeks at this moment. Who knows how long this will actually go. The judge today, is it Merchant or Merchant? Everyone's got different pronunciations for these people. Fannie Willis, Judge Merchant, whatever. You've got Trump stepping out today. Merchant today, the judge threatened to lock him in prison, lock him in jail, unless he shows up every single day to this court. Every single day. You've got to be present. So that means 2 months off the campaign trail? And you've got a big Justice Department lawyer coming from the Biden administration working on this case, all to freeze Trump out of the campaign. Do you not see what's going on here? Mike Davis covered it so well for us earlier at 3:30. If you missed it, check it out on the podcast, The Vince Coglianese Show. Here he is, President Trump, having just stepped out moments ago from that courthouse. Here's what he had to say.
Amazing things happened today. As you know, my son is graduating from high school, and it looks like the judge will not let me go through the graduation of my son, who's worked very, very hard.
Okay, some rough audio there. I'll see if I can't get you a better feed in just a moment, but President Trump saying it looks like the judge may not even let me go to Barron's graduation. How awful is that? Saying at this moment, that's up in the air, whether or not I'll be allowed to attend my own son's high school graduation for a case that should never have been brought or charged or brought to this phase at all. Here we go. President Trump outside the courthouse, New York City.
The judge will not let me go through the graduation of my son, who's worked very, very hard. He's a great student. He's very proud of the fact that he did so well. And I was looking forward for years to have a graduation with his mother and father there. And it looks like the judge isn't going to allow me to escape this scam. It's a scam trial. If you read all of the legal pundits, all of the legal scholars today, there's not one that I see that said this is a case that should be brought or tried. It's a scam. It's a political witch hunt. It continues, and it continues forever. And we're not going to be given a fair trial. It's a very, very sad thing. In addition, as you know, next Thursday, we're before the United States Supreme Court on a very big hearing on immunity. And this is something that we've been waiting for a long time. And the judge, of course, is not going to allow us. He's a very conflicted judge. And he's not going to allow us to go to that. He won't allow me to leave here for a half a day, go to D.C. and go before the United States Supreme Court because he thinks he's superior, I guess, to the Supreme Court. We got a real problem with this judge. We have a real problem with a lot of things having to do with this trial, including the DA, because you go right outside and people are being mugged and killed all day long, and he's sitting here all day with about 10 or 12 prosecutors over nothing, over what people say shouldn't be a trial. So I just want to thank you very much, but that I can't go to my son's graduation or that I can't go to the United States Supreme Court, that I'm not in Georgia or Florida or North Carolina campaigning like I should be. It's perfect for the radical left Democrats. That's exactly what they want. This is about election interference. That's all it's about. Thank you very much.
That's President Trump stepping away from the microphone there. And it's about election interference. He's totally right. That's all it is. And they're talking 2 months of keeping him off the campaign trail. 1 weekday a week, Wednesday, will he be able to escape all of this, at least as of this morning. And so now, for the most part, tied up for nearly 2 months in a New York City courtroom. That's the left's plan on a ridiculous case. How ridiculous? Greg Jarrett over on Fox News this morning made this assessment.
I must tell you, I've never seen such a tangled, torturous prosecution that would be brought against no other person except Trump. It's punitive, it's politically driven, brag, contorting the law, taking a business record misdemeanor barred by the statute of limitations and magically inflating it into 34 felonies, as Eric Shawn pointed out. To do that, he had to attach it to a supposed election law violation. Well, it's not. Federal Election Commission investigated, and they said this is perfectly legal. It is not a campaign donation. The DOJ concluded there's no crime here. But, you know, enter Alvin Bragg, who's charging under federal law, even though he's a local prosecutor and has no jurisdiction and authority to do that. But the judge is letting him get away with it.
It's a total scam. There's a report out of the New York Times today, take it for what it's worth, that apparently Donald Trump was so bored with the proceedings today he fell asleep in court.
Yeah, I have to ask, you guys have been, at the Times, have been live blogging this event. And 40 minutes ago, you wrote an observation that I was very surprised. Trump appears to be sleeping. His head keeps dropping down and his mouth goes slack. Tell us about that.
Well, Jake, he appeared to be asleep, and repeatedly his head would.
I love how "appeared to be" is enough for you to turn this into a news report.
Would fall down. There have been other moments in other trials, like the Agent Carroll trial, which was around the corner in January, where he appeared very still and seemed as if he might be sleeping, but then he would move. This time, he didn't pay attention to a note that his lawyer Todd Blanche passed him. His jaw kept falling on his chest, and his mouth kept going slack. Now, sometimes people do fall asleep during court proceedings, but it's notable given the intensity of this morning and a lot of what was being argued.
I guess I don't know what that means at the end, but so he was bored to tears. Is that the summary? Got to keep him tied up in that courtroom. The New York Times. Well, he appears to be sleeping. Let's go to press with that. Did you verify it? Did you reach out to the Trump campaign for comment or his legal team? Did you do any journalism, or you just wrote he appears to be sleeping? Coming up, Joe Kent joins us. He's a Green Beret combat veteran, Gold Star husband, and a candidate for Congress. He'll tell us his thoughts as Israel shoots down all those incoming Iranian missiles.